The 1960s gave us some of the greatest music ever made. It also gave us some of the most spectacular disasters ever witnessed on a stage. Behind the guitars and the lights and the screaming crowds, a handful of rock's biggest names were fighting something else entirely, a bottle, and they were losing, often in public, often in front of thousands of people. These aren't just rumors or tabloid stories. These are documented moments lived out on stages across the world. So let's go back and look at the 10 rock stars from 1960s that were always drunk on stage. Number 10, Jim Morrison.
You know that it would be untrue.
There is probably no name more associated with onstage intoxication in the entire history of rock music than Jim Morrison. As the frontman of The Doors, he was genuinely brilliant. A poet, a performer, someone who could hold an audience absolutely still just by standing at a microphone. He was also, by the mid to late 1960s, almost always drinking. The Doors formed in 1965 in Los Angeles and broke through with Light My Fire in 1967. Almost immediately, Morrison's behavior began to complicate everything the band was building. He would arrive at shows having already been drinking for hours. He would wander on stage late, slurring through performances, stopping mid-song to deliver rambling monologues that left his bandmates playing behind him and the audience uncertain whether they were watching a performance or a breakdown. On December 9th, 1967, during a concert in New Haven, Connecticut, a police officer found Morrison in the backstage shower area with a young woman. When the officer told him to leave, Morrison said, "Eat it," was maced, and then went on stage and told the crowd exactly what had just happened, profanity included. The police rushed the stage mid-performance and arrested him in front of the audience. He became the first rock performer in history to be arrested on stage. Then came Miami. On March 1st, 1969, Morrison arrived at the Dinner Key Auditorium, having been drinking throughout the entire day. He had also missed a connecting flight, and the show started late. The venue was dangerously overcrowded. Around 10,000 people packed into a space built for far fewer. What followed has been debated ever since. What is beyond dispute is that Morrison was so drunk he could barely sing, that he harangued the crowd with profanity and demands, and that the situation deteriorated badly enough that the Doors' road manager eventually cut the show short. Morrison was later charged with indecent exposure, public drunkenness, and profanity. He was convicted on 2 counts and sentenced to 6 months in prison and a $500 fine, a verdict he was appealing when he died in Paris in July 1971 at 27. His drummer, John Densmore, looking back on that period, noted that Morrison remained capable of extraordinary performances even in his worst years. The tragedy is that those years kept getting shorter and the drinking kept getting heavier. Number 9, Janice Joplin.
And I was feeling near as faded as my jeans.
Janice Joplin never tried to hide it. She walked onto stages across America and the world with a bottle of Southern Comfort in her hand, and she sang as if the music was pulling everything inside her straight out into the open air. Nobody else sounded like her. Nobody else showed it quite so plainly either. Joplin grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, and made her way to San Francisco in the mid-1960s, where she became the lead singer of Big Brother and the Holding Company.
I was playing soft while Bobby sang the blues.
Her performance at the Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967 made her famous overnight. She was raw, powerful, and completely unguarded. a voice that seemed to come from somewhere older and harder than anyone expected from a 23-year-old stock in August 1969, is where one of the most specific on-record accounts of her onstage state comes from. She had been waiting to go on for hours, the festival was running far behind schedule, and spent that time backstage drinking and using other substances. Pete Townshend, who performed after her that night, wrote in his memoir that even on a night that wasn't her best, she was incredible. She was also, by multiple accounts, visibly drunk. A few months later, in November 1969, things went further.
Kentucky coal mine to the California sun.
At Madison Square Garden, at a Rolling Stones concert where Ike and Tina Turner were opening, Joplin joined Tina Turner on stage for a duet. Her publicist and later biographer, Myra Friedman, was there and described what she witnessed. Joplin was, in Friedman's words, so drunk and so stoned and so out of control that the performance was hard to watch. At the Curtis Hickson Hall in Tampa, Florida, Joplin was arrested on stage for using vulgar language toward police officers who were managing crowd control. She was found guilty and fined $200. She died in October 1970 at 27 from a heroin overdose. But alcohol had been woven through every year of her career from the very beginning, and it was never something she bothered to conceal. Number 8, Keith Moon. No one in the history of rock music turned being drunk on stage into something that looked quite like art the way Keith Moon did. The drummer for The Who was one of the most technically gifted musicians of the 1960s. Rolling Stone would eventually rank him the second greatest drummer of all time. He also drank like he was trying to set a record nobody wanted to hold. Moon joined The Who in 1964 at the age of 17. The drinking started not long after. By the time the band was touring regularly through the mid-1960s, his appetite for alcohol was already the stuff of backstage legend. He celebrated his 21st birthday in August 1967 at a Holiday Inn in Flint, Michigan, where The Who were on tour supporting Herman's Hermits. By the time they went on stage that night, Moon had been drinking since he arrived in the city. After the show, he returned to the hotel and launched into what became one of the most notorious nights in rock and roll touring history. A birthday party that ended with Moon knocking out a tooth, a swimming pool incident involving a Lincoln Continental limousine, and a bill for damages in the tens of thousands of dollars. What made Moon different from almost everyone else on this list was his ability to play. Even in states of significant intoxication, his drumming remained muscular, inventive, and wildly energetic. He played like a controlled explosion, which made it all the more startling on the nights when he couldn't hold it together at all. The most famous of those nights happened in November 1973, when The Who were on their Quadrophenia tour in San Francisco. Moon had mixed brandy with what he believed were ordinary tranquilizers, which turned out to be horse tranquilizers. He passed out behind his kit during Won't Get Fooled Again, was given a cortisone injection by a doctor, and sent back on stage and passed out again during Magic Bus. Pete Townshend walked to the front of the stage and asked the audience if anyone out there could play drums. A 19-year-old named Scott Halpin was pulled from the crowd and finished the set. He had not had a ticket to the show. A friend had helped him get in at the last minute. Moon died in September 1978 from an overdose of clomethazole, a drug that had been prescribed to help him manage alcohol withdrawal. Number 7, Brian Jones. Brian Jones was the founder of the Rolling Stones. He placed the advertisement in Jazz News in 1962 that brought the band together. He gave the band its name, And within a few years of building something that would become one of the most enduring acts in rock history, he was too far gone in alcohol and drugs to stay in it.
Killed us all and his ministers, Anastasia.
Jones was a multi-instrumentalist of genuine range. He played guitar, slide, harmonica, keyboards, sitar, marimba, and more, often bringing completely unexpected sounds into Stones recordings that added layers nobody else had thought to put there. His contributions to albums like Aftermath, 1966, and Their Satanic Majesty's Request, 1967, were considerable. But what was happening to him by the late 1960s is captured most precisely in an account from recording engineer Eddie Kramer, who was working with Jimi Hendrix at Electric Lady Studios on All Along the Watchtower in 1968. Jones stumbled into the studio, drunk, and sat down at the piano. What Kramer heard was, as he described it, a clanging, out-of-time mess, wrong chords, wrong everything.
I get down with it.
Hendrix, who was in the middle of a session and didn't want to hurt his friend's feelings, quietly asked Kramer to get Jones away from the piano. Kramer told Jones to come into the control room and listen to the playback. Jones staggered in, fell in front of the console, and went to sleep on the floor. They finished recording the track over his sleeping body. On stage, the deterioration was just as visible. His bandmates began turning off his amplifier during performances without telling him, letting him stand there going through the motions while the sound coming from his guitar simply wasn't reaching anyone. Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend of The Who performed alongside the Stones at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus in December 1968, later said they both knew as they watched Jones that it would be his last live appearance with the band. It was. In June 1969, the Stones fired him. The press release cited his inability to contribute creatively. Less than a month later, on July 2nd, Jones was found dead in his swimming pool in East Sussex. The coroner recorded a verdict of death by misadventure, noting his liver and heart were severely damaged by years of alcohol and drug abuse. He was 27.
Killed us all and his ministers, Anastasia.
Number 6, Jimi Hendrix.
Where you go with that gun in your head?
Jimi Hendrix's reputation is built almost entirely and correctly on his music. The guitar work, the improvisation, the way he extended what the instrument could do. The alcohol is a part of the story that tends to get overshadowed, partly because his relationship with it was genuinely complicated, and partly because his guitar playing was so extraordinary that everything else around it tends to recede.
Hey, Joe!
Hendrix's close friend Herbie Worthington said that alcohol transformed Hendrix, that the man who was easygoing and gentle when sober became, in his own words, a completely different person when he drank. His longtime friend Sharon Lawrence wrote that liquor set off a kind of anger in Hendrix that he otherwise kept entirely hidden from the world. Kathy Etchingham, who was Hendrix's girlfriend during his London years, told an interviewer that when he first arrived in England, his drink of choice was fruit juice. Over the following years, she watched that change considerably, noting that he could consume extraordinary amounts of whiskey and simply keep going until his body gave out from under him. In January 1968, the Jimi Hendrix Experience were on tour in Europe. During the early morning hours of their first day in Gothenburg, Sweden, Hendrix got into a drunken brawl at the Hotel Opalen, smashing a plate glass window and seriously injuring his right hand in the process. He was arrested, released pending a court appearance, and eventually received a significant fine. It was the kind of incident that his management worked to keep out of the press. But it was not an isolated one. On stage, the drinking showed itself differently, not in the way it showed with Morrison, who could descend into outright incoherence, but in flashes of unpredictability that were absent from Hendrix's sober performances. He died in September 1970 at 27 after choking on vomit in his sleep, following a combination of sleeping pills and wine.
You ain't gonna put a rope around me.
Number 5, Grace Slick. Grace Slick joined Jefferson Airplane in 1966, replacing their departing vocalist, and within a year had become one of the most recognizable voices in rock music. Her performance at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 announced her as something genuinely different, a contralto that could fill a field without losing any of its edge. Jefferson Airplane's Surrealistic Pillow, 1967, and the singles that came from it made the band one of the defining acts of the San Francisco psychedelic scene. Alcohol was part of Slick's life from those early years, and she has spoken about it openly in the decades since. In a 2012 interview with Vanity Fair, she described what she was like when she drank, a self-described enormous asshole who was having a wonderful time while everyone around her was quietly horrified. She described herself as a periodic drinker, sometimes going without for weeks, then getting heavily intoxicated and getting arrested, which happened on several occasions. She once waved an unloaded gun at a police officer responding to a domestic disturbance call at her home, and was also stopped for drunk driving more than once. She later described all of these incidents with a candor that was almost admirable. The most dramatic public collapse of her drinking during her rock career came in 1978, when Jefferson Airplane had evolved into Jefferson Starship and the band was on a European tour. Before a headline show in Germany, Slick became too intoxicated to perform, and the first night of the engagement was canceled entirely. When the audience learned the show would not happen, they rioted, setting fire to the stage equipment and tearing apart the venue. When Slick appeared the following night, she taunted the crowd and was fired from the band the following morning. She joined a rehabilitation program and has been sober since the late 1990s. Number 4, Eric Burdon. Eric Burdon was, in many ways, the voice of the British blues invasion at its most raw. As the frontman of the Animals, which formed in Newcastle in 1962, he brought a depth and weight to the music that set the band apart from many of their contemporaries. Songs like The House of the Rising Sun, 1964, and We Gotta Get Out of This Place, 1965, remain among the great recordings of the decade, and Burdon's voice was at the center of both.
They call the rising sun.
Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones described Burdon as the best blues singer to come out of England. Bruce Springsteen, decades later, credited the Animals with being a defining influence on his own musical development. But from early in the Animals' success, Burdon's drinking was causing friction within the band. His rowdiness and heavy drinking were documented as contributing factors to internal tensions that led the original Animals to break up in 1966. The Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll noted directly that with the Animals' success, Burdon took to heavy drinking alongside his other pursuits. He himself confirmed in interviews that the lifestyle of the road in those years involved constant alcohol consumption, describing his social circle, which included Jimi Hendrix, as a group of people who genuinely believed they wouldn't live past 30 and who lived accordingly. After the original Animals dissolved, Burdon formed a new incarnation of the band and continued into the psychedelic era of the late 1960s, producing some of the most distinctive work of that period. The New Animals, as the group was sometimes called, released San Franciscan Nights and Sky Pilot in 1967 and 1968, respectively, records that sounded genuinely different from anything Burdon had done before, and that captured something real about the moment they came from. Through all of it, the drinking was a constant companion, part of the landscape of a life lived at maximum volume. He survived the decade, one of the few on this list who did, and has spoken candidly in the years since about how close he came to following the path of friends who didn't.
I know I want.
Number 3, Pete Townshend. Keith Moon was the most visibly chaotic presence in The Who, but Pete Townshend, the band's guitarist, chief songwriter, and de facto leader, was drinking heavily through the same years. And unlike Moon, his intoxication didn't slow him down on stage. It made him more volatile. Townshend has spoken about his drinking with uncommon candor. At a MusiCares benefit, he told the audience he spent roughly 15 years drinking heavily, up to 3 bottles of brandy a day at his worst. During the very years The Who were making their most celebrated music, he said he ate almost nothing during some of those periods. He existed almost entirely on cognac. On May 16, 1969, The Who were performing at the Fillmore East in New York during their American Tommy Tour. Mid-show, a plainclothes police officer jumped on stage during Summertime Blues, trying to grab Roger Daltrey's microphone to warn the audience that a fire had broken out in a grocery store next door. The band had no idea who he was. What they saw was an unknown person rushing the stage. Townshend reacted by kicking the officer in the crotch and knocking him off the stage. He was arrested after the show. A few weeks later at Woodstock, it happened again, this time with activist Abby Hoffman, who grabbed a microphone between songs to speak to the crowd about imprisoned MC5 manager John Sinclair. Townshend shouted at him to get off the stage and hit him with his guitar as he chased him into the wings. These weren't random explosions of youthful rock star energy. Townshend himself, looking back, identified his drinking as the engine behind his most erratic behavior during those years. The shows were electric, the drinking was constant, and the line between the two was thin enough that audiences often couldn't see it at all. Number 2, Dave Davies. The most dramatic onstage moment in the entire history of the Kinks happened in May 1965 at the Capitol Theatre in Cardiff, Wales, and it started with a drunken fight the night before. Dave Davies, the band's lead guitarist, had gotten into a brawl with drummer Mick Avery at the hotel in Taunton where they were staying. Avery, by most accounts, came out ahead. Davies arrived at the show the following night, still spoiling for it. 2 songs in, he turned around to face Avery behind the kit and told him, "Well, we drink champagne and dance all night," in a way that can be printed only partially here, that he should try playing the snare drum with a different part of his anatomy. Avery stood up from behind the drums, picked up his hi-hat stand, walked across the stage, and brought it crashing down on the back of Davies' neck. Davies' knees buckled, and he went down. Avery, convinced he had killed him, fled the venue and went into hiding for days. Davies was taken to hospital and required 15 stitches. The audience stood in stunned silence as the curtain was pulled across. The American Federation of Musicians used that incident and other accumulated offenses from the Kinks' troubled 1965 tour to ban the band from performing in the United States for 4 years. It cost them the peak years of the British invasion. As Davies himself put it, that ridiculous band took away the best years of the Kinks' career when the original band was performing at its peak. Dave Davies was a brilliant guitarist. The distorted power chord he developed by slashing his amplifier speaker cone helped define heavy rock for the decades that followed. He was also, in those early years, someone whose drinking made him capable of provoking a near catastrophe in front of 2,500 people without apparently thinking twice about it. Number 1. John Bonham. Led Zeppelin came together in September 1968, making John Bonham a rock star of the 1960s in the truest sense. The band's self-titled debut album was released in January 1969, but Bonham's reputation as a drummer and as a drinker was already being established in those first months of the band's existence. Bonham grew up in Redditch, Worcestershire, and had been playing in local bands since his mid-teens. By the time Jimmy Page recruited him for Led Zeppelin, he was already known in the English music scene as someone who could play with extraordinary power and feel. He could also drink extraordinary amounts of alcohol. Those who worked with him described a pronounced Jekyll and Hyde quality. Sober, he was warm, funny, family-oriented. Drunk, he was unpredictable and sometimes frightening.
And my spirit is crying for leaving.
From the very first Zeppelin tours in 1968 and 1969, the drinking was a constant. On the road, particularly on American tours, Bonham would drink vodka straight, in large quantities, often from the time he woke up. His personal assistant, Rex King, who traveled with him extensively, described the routine of managing someone who was almost never entirely sober and had to be monitored around the clock. Others who worked those early tours spoke about Bonham's mood swings, about the warm, gregarious man who could turn on a dime once the drinking passed a certain point, and about the tension of never quite knowing which version of him was going to be there when the curtain went up.
Forests will echo with laughter.
What remained constant, almost impossibly, was the drumming. And yet, for most of Led Zeppelin's performing years, Bonham showed up and played. The drumming on those early tours has been described by people who witnessed it as some of the most powerful live drumming they had ever seen. The physicality and precision of his playing, the bonzo sound as it came to be known, remained intact even on the worst nights. What the drinking was doing to his body was less visible. By 1980, those around him could see that it was accelerating beyond anything sustainable. On September 24th, 1980, Bonham consumed roughly 40 measures of vodka over the course of a day, passed out at Jimmy Page's home, and died in his sleep. He was 32. Led Zeppelin announced their disbandment 10 weeks later.
Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but
These were not ordinary people leading ordinary lives. They were burning at a temperature most of us will never come close to, performing in front of thousands, recording music that would last generations, and carrying weights that the lights and the crowds couldn't always hide. Some of them made it through. Some of them didn't. What stays with you, looking back at any of these stories, is not just the chaos. It's the music that existed alongside it, and the reminder that what you heard on those records and those stages was coming from real people, fighting real things in real time. If this video brought something back, or introduced you to something new, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more from this era to explore, and we'll see you in the next one.